Welcome to Cognitive Dissidents, where we join together to resist the technocracy one free thought at a time. I'm Monica Perez of The Monica Perez Show.
I'm Hrvoje Moric of the Geopolitics and Empire podcast.
And I'm Parallel Mike of the Parallel Mike podcast and Parallel Systems broadcast.
Hey guys, thanks for being here. Thank you all for listening. This is a really fraught time, let's say. We are 1 month away from the U.S. elections, which is Senate, Congress, and President. Don't forget that it's going to have a massive difference. And if you look at the mainstream polls, all three of those things are basically could go either way. So I want to dig into that. But a lot of things are happening this October. They could be October surprises. They could be events that are designed to affect the election. Even if they're not designed to affect the election, they may still affect the election. And the biggest thing, the scariest thing for me is what's happening in the Middle East right now. So there is a list of countries that are involved in this conflagration over there, or near soon to be, I fear, a conflagration where Israel was, leveling Gaza, then started basically invading Lebanon. Now it's bombing the suburbs of Beirut. The U.S. is bombing Yemen right now. Israel bombed Yemen. The U.S. has bombed Syria recently. We've had the Secretary of Defense say Iraq may get caught in the crossfire. We have assets there. That could be a tripwire for us to get involved. Iran was hitting Israel. I mean, Turkey said, hey, we got to stand shoulder to shoulder with Lebanon. This thing, I don't know if I left anything out, but there might be other countries. This thing may be getting really big, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's mostly theater. A lot of people are dying, but it could be for other effects. So, Mike, you said in a little chat with a picture of the missiles, if you don't mind my sharing something that you said, Israel bombing Israel to go to war with Israel. Did I understand that correctly? And can you explain that? And then let's talk about what's really going on here.
I kind of feel like I've just been doxxed.
Sorry. Was that bad?
No, I'm totally joking.
Okay.
It feels to me like, if you took Israel out the picture, none of these wars in the Middle of the East, none of the fronts would be happening, right? It's all centralized around Israel. And I think, sometimes the problem isn't everyone else, it's you. And,
yeah. Because I didn't mean to talk to you. I was thinking that Iran, I actually feel like Iran may be controlled opposition and that they're allowing that back and forth as an excuse to escalate.
Oh, I totally agree. Do either of you follow the guy on Twitter called something Quaker? It's called like the Confident Quaker or the something Quaker. That guy's really interesting, and he often shares pictures with lineages and histories of different players in the game. So he's done a lot about Iranian presidents and politicians over the past few months, and it totally feels like they're all connected to the Anglo-Zionist empire. So I agree. I tend to agree that a lot of it is orchestrated. At the political level, like whenever Iran does its retaliations, of course, it's telling Israel, we're going to send this many bombs. This is how we're going to do it. And then they kind of, in the media, paint it as though Iran has given Israel a bloody nose, but I don't think it's actually happening. I think most of those bombs, missiles are being taken out by the dome. And yeah, I do have a few people in Israel and they said, yeah, we've not, if something gets through, it's really rare. It's really rare. So I don't think it's really a war in any of this situation. I think Israel's expanding outwards. And, this whole thing with Lebanon has got a really long history. Israel and Lebanon goes back to like the 1940s. So I think if you look at the history, it feels like we're just repeating it. And every time we get to these moments, it's like in our media, we get told it's about terrorism and different incursions, when actually it's about the expansion of this project. And we can talk maybe a little bit more about that. But that's my take. Yeah, I feel like a lot of this is orchestrated and desired, and it's going towards an end goal.
What I thought was hilarious, they took out the Hezbollah leadership, Nasrallah, and many others. And the report just yesterday, these are just early reports. This is from Al Arabiya. The cousin of the late Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, Hashem Safieddine, who was slated to replace him, he was hit by the Israelis, and it's not sure if they took him out. So it's just like it's becoming hilarious where, they pop one off right after the other. It's almost like they're invincible. And what you guys were saying, I was sort of going down the rabbit hole a bit the other day with, Anthony Sutton, going back to Anthony Sutton's works. And I think I've read scraps of them in the online versions, but I think I'm going to purchase the physical hard copies. And something I was reading, he was saying that 2/3 of Soviet basically industry and technology came from the United States. So it was like all these different, U.S. companies, steel industry, technology, manufacturing, that was all given to Russia and Soviet Union. So what Mike is saying, it's like, it kind of makes me sad because it feels like there's no organic, real rivalries. It's kind of like everything is so fake. And I was listening to old interview from the Shah of Iran from 1976 in 60 Minutes.
Yes, that was great.
And I think he speaks like a true statesman. I'm not talking when I speak about these things, I'm not saying I like this person or don't like them, but he spoke like a true statesman. He spoke about Jewish control of the media, but it almost sounded like what you're saying, Mike, that he has some, of course he was put in by CIA British, right? But I think the key is what you're saying, Mike. And I've had Iranian friends from Iran who've talked about these conspiracy theories that they also think that in Iran, people talk about, just like we do for our countries, they say how Iran, the leadership in Iran is also plugged into the globalists. But I think the point here is they're happy to network with the globalists, but there's a certain point where they don't want to cross that line and give them full total control over them. And that's how I read, like the Shah was saying that, he's plugged into that globalist network, but even he has a line where he's not going to allow them to cross. And I think that's always the crux of the matter. No.
Okay. I have a lot to say about that. I agree with you on the Shah, and he was a total statesman. I love that. I got that from your feed. I'm going to play it on a clip on one of my shows next week because that is old school, highly educated, well-trained in communication, honest. He seemed to be honest. I feel like JFK, Nixon, Reagan were all of the same ilk. Like they were plugged in, but they also considered themselves independent actors to some extent, a man in the position of power. And for that reason, I think they took all 4 of those guys out. In Iran, if you look at Rouhani, so there was one thing I noticed from that. At the end of that, they say, whoever it was, Dan Rather, Mike Wallace says to him, we have this report from the CIA that you're a megalomaniac. And then I was thinking, Ahmadinejad was crazy, if you'll recall. And then between them, there were others, but there's also, or since then, Rouhani. Rouhani was like a more moderate guy. He's gone now, but he got his PhD in a Scottish university. And at that, his PhD advisor had in himself a PhD advisor who was the guy who kind of told the world about Lockerbie. He was the legal expert on Lockerbie, telling everybody it was Libya. So Rouhani is 2 degrees of separation away from like some worldwide propaganda on behalf of the empire. So I totally agree with that. Whereas like Soleimani was probably less cooperative with the Western world, so they took him out. So I guess there's some interaction there in Iran, so I wanted to ask both of you what you think about this. So when they talk about Yemen, we're bombing Yemen, Israel's bombing Yemen, Lebanon, it's always about their Iranian proxies, or Syria, Iranian proxies, or because Iran. And my question to both of you is it true that Iran helps these people? And if they do, is that an excuse for Israel or the U.S. to bomb them?
Well, for me, it's a pass on that one because I have no idea if they are truly, helping them. I think if I was going to be orchestrating this mess, I'd make sure the money was at least funneled through someone in Iran. I'd want some credibility to my fake operation. So yeah, I think I'd be funneling money. But for me, I think, if you look back at the history of all of these nations, like Hrvoje, you mentioned Russia. If you go back to the 1880s, 1890s, pretty much 80 to 90% of Russian oil was owned by the Rothschilds. The whole industry was owned by the Rothschilds. And they started to globalize it to basically ship oil out of Russia and sell it to, Western nations. And that was during the reign of the Tsar. And then, of course, we had the coup where they killed off the royal family. And what happened was the Rothschilds in 1912, they sold off most of Russia's oil holdings to Shell. So Royal Dutch Shell. So it was still a part of the Anglo Empire. So all this time throughout the period where Russia was supposedly the enemy of the rest, the West, the rest of the West, all of the oil was still owned by the West. So, going back to what you were saying, Hrvoje, like, are we really meant to believe the historical narrative? Or if we look at the actual financial element, you can see that, it was really a proxy. And I don't think the leaders of Russia were genuinely antagonistic in the way that we are told in history books. And I think it's probably the same with most of these countries. Iran, for sure. Now, Lebanon, I think if you look at what they're doing to Lebanon in terms of trying to, destroy their economy before this invasion, this has happened many times. I think they maybe do present some genuine antagonism, but let's face it, there's going to be no resistance to Israel. But Iran, for me, is a complete. Well, I'd say it's a big question mark. I don't believe Iran are genuinely the enemy of the West. The same way I don't believe North Korea. I think you can put them both in the same category.
Yeah, I would just add, you mentioned Ahmadinejad. I don't know if you saw that article. It was in my weekly roundup, Ynet News, that Ahmadinejad told CNN Turkey that the man who headed Iran's division meant to thwart Mossad operations was found in 2021 to be an Israeli spy. And another 20 members were Mossad agents. So it speaks kind of to what we're saying. And I would assume that, yes, that, the Houthis and these different Hezbollah and groups, that they are Iran backed. In the objective scheme of geopolitics, I don't see that as a bad thing. I mean, the West is financing ISIS and Al Qaeda. So this is what states will do. So I'm just looking at it matter of factly. So, yeah, that's sort of my take.
It's a legitimate defensive alliance. If the official narrative is correct, my opinion is, if it really is correct that those guys are looking for help from Iran, or even if they were looking for help from Russia, it would be reasonable because they're on the defensive.
That's the point I was going to say, because the West is going for global control. Yeah. And they're defending themselves. If it was the other way around, then it'd be like, guys, what's going on here?
And that brings me to another thing that I noticed in the news was that Turkey, Erdogan said, he said something in the UN, but he also said something to his own assembly. Basically, we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with Lebanon, because after Israel's finished with all of these other countries, they will come for us. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm curious to know, with both of your international perspectives, Erdogan doesn't seem like a good guy to me, but he seems like he might be a Turkish guy. He might actually have his interests aligned with Turkey, which is more than I can say for my government. What do you think about that? Is that a legitimate defensive position for him to take as the Turkish leader? What do you think is really going on there, if you have any thoughts on Turkey at this time?
I'll just go in and say that I think he's the ultimate hedger. He's ultimate opportunist. He'll take what he can from the West, take what he can from the East, and then whichever way the wind is blowing, he'll go in that direction. So if in the end the West falls and BRICS rises, he'll be like, "See you guys." It goes with the East. And there's talk of these neo-Ottoman aspirations. So I view Turkey and Erdogan as sort of as a budding empire now. And having lived in Kazakhstan, and things that you didn't realize unless you lived in those countries, Kazakhstan and Turkey come from the same historic, tribe, language, and all that. And so you saw in Kazakhstan a lot of presence of Turkish economy, there were Turkish schools in Kazakhstan, and then in the Caucasus, Turkey is involved in the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict, and then Greece and Cyprus, and so you can see this sort of vision of it's expanding, its influence, its fight over energy in the Mediterranean, right? And so, Yeah, that's how I see Turkey. And if you look at it, sometimes even in biblical terms, it's almost like sometimes I think of these powers, these centers
Asia
of
Minor,
power.
right? Wouldn't it
Yeah,
be
like
called
these
Asia
centers of
Minor?
powers that they're ruled by like some fallen angel or demon who's like behind this figure. And you think about it, I mean, all these figures have been around for decades now. Erdogan and Putin and Xi Jinping, he's on his third forever term. And it's almost like I mean, this is kind of tongue in cheek, but it's almost like they're inhabited by these biblical sort of demons,
animated by demons or something.
spirits, and then they're just sort of vying for domination of the planet. But yeah, Turkey. I think we're going to see a lot of interesting stuff, and I think they're doing well for their economy. I mean, geographically, they're well positioned in economic terms, I think.
So I have a few things to say about that, but Mike, I want you to go next.
Yeah, I really like what you said, Hrvoje. That kind of laid it out in a similar fashion to me. I think when you have these old empires, they often don't want to relinquish those, or they harbor the same dreams. They want to go back to being an empire because the Ottoman Empire was such a key part of European history and world history. And to think that a nation that big doesn't still harbor those kind of aspirations. I mean, I think Western Europe doesn't anymore. Most of the Western European nations are conquered from within, but Turkey, it's got the largest army out of all of the NATO countries. Poland's second, Turkey's first. It's a massive country. And also now, of course, it's a Muslim country. And what's happening to Europe is it's been Islamified. So if you imagine that in 10 years' time, let's say this doesn't play out like the US hopes for, and the US has an internal collapse due to financial crisis. So let's imagine these debt pyramids collapse and the US all of a sudden can't focus on all of these wars across the world or on meddling in Europe's pipelines and all of the rest. And they have to withdraw and focus on the massive problems they're going to have back at home. Then you're going to have a power vacuum in Europe. If NATO fails, which I think it will eventually, it will collapse. Then you've got the power vacuum in Europe. You've got a largely young Muslim population in countries like Sweden, Germany, France, and an aging Western population who are very timid. And then you've got Turkey sat there just waiting for the moment where maybe if it all starts to kick off in Europe, it starts to expand its borders. If we go to World War III and the US cannot fulfill its peace or its defense promises to Europe, well, then everything fails. All of these borders in Europe are so delicately held together. They're all artificial. Most of them are created over the past 20 to 50 years. So I think the whole thing is a tinderbox. And as much as we might not like the US, they have held Europe in this stable jigsaw. But as soon as the US goes because of the financial collapse or because they're just overextended and the empire's gone, then Europe is just going to fragment. And I think the natural maybe predecessor to NATO would be Turkey because they're Muslim, we've got the largest army, and I think they're ambitious. And like Hrvoje said, they span both East and West. They're hedging the bets. And maybe that would mean they'd actually create some kind of deals and ententes with, China, maybe Russia too, Kazakhstan. Maybe they'd align themselves, but they'd be the new, central figure in Europe. I don't know. I'm just predicting maybe not now, but like 10, 15 years out.
You brought up some really interesting points that tie together, I think, some of my reactions to Hrvoje. It not only would Turkey take advantage of a power vacuum in Europe, but it seems like that may be what he's poised to do now in the Middle East, in that they are creating chaos. And I was reading an article that it was actually a paper to the defense, whatever, from 1997, I think, by Stephen Pelletier, Pelletiere. He was a diplomat of some kind. And I was actually researching Yemen, it was like 7 years ago because we were bombing them for whatever reason. And he said that now that the USSR is taken out, so he wrote this in 1997, prior to this, we could never allow a failed state because they would just go it was a bipolar world. So you could lose a piece to the other side, but it wouldn't be neutralized. It would add to the other side. So you can't have a failed state. He said, now we can experiment with that. And Yemen, as the poorest country in the world, I don't think he owned recommending this, but he said we could allow Yemen to fail. and see what happens. Let's just see what that looks like. And if that is the mindset that they're bringing to this. And then another thing I was reading, Oded Yinon, the Oded Yinon plan, the strategy for Israel in the 80s or whatever, which it seems to be that never totally went away. And it's maybe more alive now than ever. The plan was actually that each country would be kind of splintered into their tribal sects or whatever, and you'd make it so that there was a lot of internal warring and they would bring themselves down. Again, if you're thinking about allowing chaos, you have to make sure that there's nowhere to run. So if they're all saying these are all Iran-backed things, but if Iran is controlled opposition, then they are contributing to the chaos. They're not going to exploit that fragmentation. But Erdogan seems like the rare case of a genuinely rogue actor, like a truly non-aligned but very powerful person, statesman, whatever, who might take advantage of that chaos first in the Middle East and then in Europe or whatever. Maybe he has sights on that kind of thing. And just going back to the idea that Anthony Sutton, as you were saying, Hrvoje, that he talked about all the materiel, everything coming to Russia from the West. China also got so much from the West. If you ever look at James Corbett's stuff about Rockefeller supporting China. And then also if you read these books by Dr. Dan McGregor about World War I think it's World War I, but also I think it may also apply to World War II, but certainly World War I, the West just supplied them with so much food and material just to keep the war going. And they did also keep World War II going. So we do fight both sides of the war for whatever reasons. And that worries me. But those are just my thoughts on that. But I do want to ask if you guys think this is really going to ignite, or do you think that there's a great chance that it's really an October thing and that it's really just about the US election and maybe we have some peace after? Or does it really, Trump is calling for Israel to bomb Iran. They say Iran's nuclear facilities. They have one nuclear power plant. I assume that's what they would bomb. But Trump is calling for that. So is this going to explode after the election? Is it for the election? What's the story?
I would just add what you were saying, the Iran-Contra affair in the 80s, where Israel and the U.S. sent arms, weapons to Iran. Just, one of these million examples, or it was recently the 75th anniversary of was it Mao from China? And early on, you had the U.S. supporting, was it Sun Yat-sen, right? The KMT. And then all of a sudden they stopped fighting. And, if you look at the history, it kind of seemed like, I liked Sun Yat-sen. I'm thinking Chiang Kai-shek.
You like Chiang Kai-shek?
Right, they were the Chinese nationalists. And
they were the Republicans.
Sudden,
my parents supported Taiwan
right,
from the beginning.
Was Sun Yat-sen, then Chiang Kai-shek. Sorry, it's early, it's morning for me here, but but then all of a sudden they stopped financing them and sort of let Mao win, and you see that same thing, or with Iran-Contra, or with in the China situation, or whatever. I see three scenarios to what you said. Maybe it's just hype now and nothing's going to happen once we have the election. Or that near term things will pop off, or longer term. I think eventually the fuse is going to blow, and we will be off to the races. I just finished. I participated in Mikhail Thorup's Expat Money Summit VIP panel with the guys from Anti-War, and I think collectively our conclusion was that we are headed eventually for war. I interviewed an Australian military veteran not long ago, and he says his working assumption is that's where we're headed. But then he mentioned the timeline. Like for the U.S., he thought that 2027 is the cutoff. I'm talking about China, but that's all I think interlinked, because what we're talking about with Turkey and Iran and China and Israel. It's like if anyone, it's like a game of musical chairs. So everyone's waiting for the first move, and once someone makes that move, everyone else goes.
That's world war.
Yeah, and so that's kind of, I think we're going there. The question is only timing.
Yeah, I think what's happened over the last few years is really instructive. I think it kicked off with the agenda from 2020 onwards. So that just weakened the world and started to fragment everything with all of the lockdowns and the way that allowed them to pick winners and losers as well economically during that. And it separated America and China and it really, really embedded that narrative in that China's responsible for this. And we know it's all bullshit. Like the Wuhan lab was funded by the Americans. But forgetting that, what the mainstream crowd got was that, this is a Chinese virus, Donald Trump. And they've created all of these fronts. And I see these fronts as like the buildup, the Ukraine and Russia one. If you're going to have China and Taiwan and you're going to start a really big conflict, you need to set up all these fronts to start keeping people busy and weaken them. You want Russia preoccupied in Ukraine, you want them preoccupied in Poland, you want Belarus preoccupied. And if you look at where all the funding's going right now, like for example, in Poland, there's been about, I think the US lent Poland, was it 20 billion? They lent them 20 billion to install new weapon systems from the US. So it's basically, we're going to give you 20 billion and you can only spend that on US military weapons.
Yeah.
And they gave them really favorable rates, but we don't know what the rates was, but we do know that Poland sent a load of gold across to the US as collateral. They didn't call it collateral, but it's now sat in the New York Fed. So that's where it is. And also they got a big loan from South Korea, which is an American proxy. So that's more weapons. They spent $5 billion on missile defense from Great Britain, American proxy. So you can see the building. And what you said, 2027, like I think, yeah, that makes sense because it's going to take a couple of years for all of this new military infrastructure to be up and running. But when it is, I don't think it's just going to sit there gathering cobwebs. I think it's going to be used. So I think they're setting up all of the fronts. And those fronts, not all of them are going to be major fronts. They're going to be there to preoccupy other nations who might support China in the main front. So, Russia's very powerful. You need to keep her busy everywhere. You want fronts developing everywhere. And Middle East as well, all of those fronts are going to start to, because you think about it, if you want to get a third world war, you need to think about all these little pieces and like, how do we keep them busy so that they don't tip the odds in the favor of, whoever it's going to be. And I don't know how it's going to unfold, but I think at this point to say that we're not going to have that big conflict would be very hopeful, maybe a little bit too optimistic, because just look where the money's going. Just look where the money's going right now in terms of military spending. They're clearly setting up for something. And it's worrying. Like I'm living in a giant military base, guys.
I just wanted to add to you've just painted a picture and I just see again, the ultimate goal is world government. I'm obsessed with that topic because for me, it's a biblical topic. That's what, Book of Daniel and Revelations speaks to. And that's what we're seeing the globalists. And so I feel like they control the core nodes, the core infrastructure of the planet. The banks, they control the banks. This occultocracy controls the banks, the corporations, the manufacturing, everything. And so they could blow up large parts of the world because they hold on to the core, for reconstruction and control. And so it's kind of like they have to have all this chaos because then, you have for this begging for some antichrist figure, number one. Then people will say we're done with sovereignty. Another thing I brought up recently, I think they're intentionally using Israel to create this mess because they want to get people fed up with the Abrahamic religions. They'll say, look at these Christians and Jews and Muslims. We're sick of it. Here, we have this new one world theosophic religion for you where it's universalist. And, so I think there's many things that are going on there. And like Mike said, it's that, was it Pushkin? There's that Russian play that says there's a loaded gun in the first
Chekhov's gun.
Right. Chekhov's gun. Yeah. And then it's going to be used at the end. I think that there's no way this stuff is not going to be used. They want Asian NATO, where these countries are now getting all sorts of weaponry, and it's going to be used to come on. And yeah.
Okay. Well, I have
sorry, I realized, Mike, I didn't even answer your question about October. Like, is this just a flash in the pan? Are we going to see it? I think as soon as the next president gets in, we are off to the races. 2025 is going to be a huge year, in my opinion. I think it's going to eclipse everything we've seen, maybe even what we saw in 2020. So I'm Yeah, I think we're there now because, I always talk about cycles and, we're definitely in the war cycle, the solar maximum. I always say 80% of all wars and revolutions have occurred at the peak of the solar cycle. We're in the peak now. Going into 2025 is the final peak of that. So, and they use these cycles because, these guys are occultists. So they are all about astrology and the movement of planets. And if they think they can get an edge by timing something for a certain place, they do it. Yeah, they totally will do it. So I think 2025, we just have to be ready for a big year. And I think Donald Trump is the right guy for what, you're not going to put Kamala in for that. You're going to put in Trump. He's the guy who can, lead the nation towards wanting to have war.
I agree with that. I'd like to have a few responses to what you've been saying, and then it leads us to another topic if we're ready to move on. 2 topics really we have left. One is just to tick these things off. The aid that they give people, that's very classic. I think Israel's always been like that. Many countries are like that. We call it aid. We approve it as aid, but it's only weapons. It's like food stamps are part of our agricultural bill. Food stamps are part of the bill that supports farms, not welfare. So these things are like jobs programs for the defense industry. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of how that kind of just venalism, is that it's just a venality, that it's really, the money does matter. People say it doesn't matter. I think it does matter, the movements of money. I think that a lot of the blowing up of bombs, moving stuff around. I think they had like South America sending all their Soviet weapons back over to Ukraine, which was ridiculous. They're not going to use it. What's all that for? And I think that they are actually, it's possible that they're blowing up or moving out inventory literally to make physical space for all the new arms that they're going to need to rebuild that for the next thing. I think that the idea that they're getting everything in place all over, opening up fronts. I just read an article that said India and China were actually getting hot after years of kind of border issues, and nobody's covering that. And I didn't understand the significance of it, but that would be another front for sure. In keeping with what you're saying, they just had Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Germany, Canada, France, the US, and the UK all put ships through the Straits of Taiwan, which China doesn't like. Why would you do that? That's another provocation. Finally, the idea that you want to go to world government is totally supported. This would be the method, war, and everybody being in on it and happy to do it, to sacrifice their own people with whom they have no relationship, in my opinion. The Carnegie Endowment many years ago, I've talked about this so many times, I'm sure other people have too, where the Carnegie Endowment wanted to change the culture of the U.S., and they determined that the best way to do that was war. And they encouraged us to get into World War I as a consequence of that. And then the last thing that I wanted to respond to or pull the thread, Hrvoje, is about getting people fed up with the Abrahamic religions. And that's something that I was thinking, with all the kind of religious imposters, poseurs, whatever, that are happening now, my thought was these people are inauthentic. And if and when, and they get put in the same basket as people who are authentic, and when they get discredited, which they will, which they want to be, they will bring down the whole structure of those who they're not only exploiting the genuine religion, or Christianity, but they are they're meaning to bring it down wholesale. So I wonder if this is a time that we should go to what Mike wanted to get our opinions on.
I don't know what it is.
It's the Russell Brand thing.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, the Russell Brand. Oh yeah, no, totally. That was so this is something that we've all been chatting, I think, in our respective work. I know, Hrvoje, you've done loads on, you always talk about this push towards this, that they're going to take it to some kind of cosmic Christ, and that there's this revival of fake religion, and they're trying to deceive the masses. And I'm totally on top of that too, we've done episodes on Alice Bailey, and we called it the Cosmic Christ Deception. And yeah, we've looked into it all and we all see it coming. But now it's very bizarre. We've got this revival of Christianity, and yet the leaders of this revival are probably the least authentic that you could choose. I mean, Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand are the seeming figureheads now. And there was recently at this whole, it's a fake pushback, let's be honest. What was it called? Save the Republic or something?
Restore the Republic, I think.
Restore the Republic. And it basically had all of the same figureheads that you see who are supposedly, they're supposedly the pushback. And, we've all got our opinions on them. But, it's like the Robert Malones, it's the people who just came out of nowhere. Like in 2021, they just came out of nowhere and all of a sudden had millions of followers and views. And now they're supposedly representative of the pushback.
Rescue the Republic.
Rescue the Republic. And there was this moment during that where there was Russell Brand on stage. Now, bearing in mind, Russell Brand converted to Christianity about 4 weeks ago. Like about 4 weeks ago? I think about 4 weeks. Yeah, he got baptized in this kind of homoerotic ceremony with Bear Grylls. They were like topless. There was 3 of them cuddling, getting baptized in a lake. And it was filmed, so it was like a very, public kind of showmanship of event type thing. And they decided at this event to get the whole crowd, 25,000, to recite the Lord's Prayer. And it was Russell Brand who got baptized 4 weeks ago. And literally his entire life has been this kind of sex fiend, drug fiend, and done some really nasty stuff as well. Like if you look into that guy's past, like he did some really cruel stuff. Like, you remember the time he called up the guy who he'd been sleeping with his granddaughter, and he called him up live on air and told him? Yeah, like a British kind of journalist. He called him up live on air and basically said on air, like, yeah, I've been sleeping. Yeah, on live. Yeah. And also, I know recently he bought a place. He lives on a really nice part of the UK on the River Thames bank. And he bought a big, massive pub. And the pub had a load of bookings for weddings, and he just cancelled them all. Like zero regard for the people. And I was like, come on, with all your money, you could have honored somebody's wedding day, like, So yeah, I don't think he strikes me as a moral person personally, but it's up to the individual to make that. So there was him. And then there's Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson has blocked me on Twitter. So
really? Wow, that is quite an honor.
I know, quite an honor, right? But I honestly think he's got a team. I think he probably employs at least 20,000 people to block people on Twitter.
Well, even 20 people would be more than enough to.
Yeah, I think that's probably his key outgoing.
He had 8 million people on the subscribing to his YouTube channel when I was looking up some of this Russell Brand stuff.
Oh yeah,
million YouTube.
That guy knows how to work mammon. Like
that's just YouTube.
The money rolling in.
Yeah.
And but I remember a few months back, it's like 6 months ago, he was complaining that YouTube rip off creators, and he showed his monthly outgoings. He showed he actually screenshotted his monthly outgoings, and it was like only 30K a month. And I was just like sinking in my chair at my like $20 a month or whatever YouTube. Yeah. I was like, come on, Jordan, read the room, buddy. But yeah, and he's the other guy who was praying. And I'm like, just a few years ago, they asked him, do you believe in God? And as Hrvoje said, gave a 10-minute word salad, well, first and foremost, what is God and what is belief? And he just couldn't even say it. So at best, he was agnostic. At best you could say he was agnostic. And yet now these guys are going to be the figureheads of Christianity. And yeah, I ain't buying it. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen and we can have a little...
And as you're sharing your screen, I just want to add, you mentioned Russell Brand's very sinful history. I believe we are all sinners and all that, but I have no problem with believing someone like Russell Brand could become a Christian at all. I believe the son of Sam, the serial killer, became a real Christian.
Son of hope.
We mentioned that earlier. Yeah. So I don't think there's any that Russell Brand could become an honest to goodness, authentic Christian, but it's kind of what you're saying, Mike, that he's not demonstrating an example of an authentic Christian. He just, I don't know if you saw the photos, he baptized someone else. He was participating in the baptism of someone else, and he was in the river in his tidy whities, and it's just kind of like, in all my time, and I've gone I've lived in Kazakhstan and Mongolia and in Croatia and U.S., Mexico, and I've been part of local churches there and seen different baptisms. No one, in no Christian church would you see someone in their tidy whitey, and not even boxer shorts, but tidy whitey underwear baptizing. Like, because there's that, you want to have, it's like Adam and Eve, right? In the garden, God puts leaves on them. You have to have, what's the word I'm looking for? This sort of appropriateness, right? And so, anyways, if you want, go ahead and show that clip.
Yeah, I'll share it. But yeah, just what you said. Yeah, I think like, I don't want listeners to think like, it's like I'm some kind of gatekeeper for Christianity. I think what we're specifically talking about is for a long time, there's been an agenda to have this faux Christianity that's going to merge with all of these other religions. And if you look at Russell Brand and his logo, like everything, it's like there's a Krishna, there's a cross, there's the Om symbol. There's like, he would totally be the guy. So that's why I think you got to be a little bit,
there's a
cautious around
sun
people like
behind him, kind of right now. Just looking at his most recent.
Let's see. Let's look at this one then.
Lord, I ask that we brought together in these principles under your name. I pray for America, and if I have your permission, ladies and gentlemen, we'll end with the Lord's Prayer. Just do the version that you know. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Hallelujah!
There we go. So I'm waiting for Dr. Peterson to forgive me and unblock me on Twitter for the one interaction I ever had with his account, which was an instant block. I basically tagged him in his Give Him Hell Netanyahu post when he was he'd done a tweet about forgiveness or something along those lines. It was about, looking after one another. I said, well, what about the Give Him Hell Gaza? Like, geez, that's how many kids, what percentage of the population's kids over there? Is it like 50%, I want to say, in Palestine? Anyway, so I tagged him in that, and then, I got blocked. So he hasn't forgiven me yet, but they're talking about forgiveness with the Lord's Prayer. Maybe he's going to forgive me at some point. And yeah, I don't know. What's your guys' take on this? Do you feel like this is genuine? Like there is a genuine a revival to the Christian movement, and that these guys are going to be the ones who bring it?
Could I just share my screen? I've got a clip I want to, and I just want to show you those are comments from other Christians. This guy says, if you're fooled by these two false prophets, you're spiritually dead. He goes on to say, best case scenario, they are subversive grifters and not intentional false prophets for the New Age movement or some similar offshoot. In Daniel versus Babylon on X, I like this account. He says, sorry, I'm not buying it. Any of it. None of the conversions, none of posts by him or others. It's getting weirder by the second, and it's part of Satan's false light BS. Their Jesus is not my Jesus. I'm saying it now. This is a false Jesus. And this clip is hilarious. You can see it says Munya Chawawa. This is the first time I came across him. It's got 2.3 million views now. He's I think, in Britain, some comedian. And I want to play this. I think it's hilarious.
People don't like Donald Trump because he's an ethereal gladiator of justice, protecting the fickle fabric of the universe.
Russell, the allegations have just come out.
Ugh. I'm Christian. I've been redeemed. I'm forgiven. That's good timing, isn't it?
Mary was a bit of a sore, wasn't she?
Russell, the allegations.
Oh, yeah, hallelujah. What do you think about these new Instagram handles? I've got BAB, Born Again Brandy, GWR, Got It What It Russell.
What about the essay?
Shining Apostle. Love it. Praise him.
Russell?
Yeah?
We need to talk about the allegations.
I can't, sorry, it's getting to the clappy wappy bit of Shine Jesus Shine.
But Russell,
sorry, I've got one more. What was that? What do you think of this baptism pic?
I think people should have a choice whether they see you in your underwear.
Should they? I better get off to confession then.
Russell,
yeah?
The allegations.
I can't, I'm afraid. I'm reading Deuteronomy 30:16. Totally appropriate gap, by the way.
Russell?
Sorry, I'm just converting someone on the phone. Can we do what in tongues, you cheeky minx? Pray?
Yeah, that sounds great. A furious, flamboyant, feminine
No,
wizard?
Russell, this is wrong. You can't just conveniently convert to a religion to shield yourself against things you've done wrong.
Sorry, God's on the line. What's that? Signal's not very good. All right, God, stay on the prayer. I'm just going to step outside.
Russell.
Go very far away.
Russell!
And I think you got the idea there. And just one more. This is a vigilant citizen who I followed for many years. He studies. He is a very, for me, it's difficult. I don't comment so much on the occult stuff because I like to do it from an academic perspective. And you can just get completely lost when talking about symbolism and the occult. But I found he does a monthly wrap up and he includes all factual mainstream images from magazines. And when he puts them all together, it just blows your mind because then it really it puts into all into one place. And they're all like mainstream sources. And you see how in your face satanic it is. But he just wrote this article on P. Diddy, which I think has some relation to Russell Brand. And one thing stood out for me. He says, there's absolutely nothing new about this P. Diddy stuff. Years ago, I published an article in which I documented several artists who signed up with Diddy and made a 180-degree turn towards religion to an extreme. As explained in the article, it wasn't a coincidence. These people saw things that deeply troubled them spiritually and sought refuge in religion. And so that made me think of, there's a trend here. Think about it. Russell Brand now, Jordan Peterson, Justin Bieber, right? I can't even think. Kanye West. He came out with that Christian album. It was all Christian. And now he's falls away. He's, committing adultery or fornication, Our Bible says, and I believe this, the only place you can commit, have sex is in a marriage. So even if you're boyfriend and girlfriend, if you're, having relations, you're committing sin. So if Kanye was a true Christian, they wouldn't be doing it. So stuff. That's just one of many examples. And then you see these people. Bieber is implicated with P. Diddy in that article. It says he finds a mainstream quote where Bieber was 15 and P. Diddy was a man, and that they were going to be alone, just the two of them, for 48 hours or something, going buck wild, something like that.
I remember that video clip. Yeah,
and so nasty stuff probably went on. Some of these people for trauma purposes, probably go see Christianity. Maybe they go to a bad church, and then they just don't end up becoming true converts. Or maybe some, this is a silly video we just saw, maybe they're doing it for just PR purposes, right? Laying on the Christianity, or it could be or a mix for the New Age thing.
Yeah, I think it's all of them. And also there's a huge narcissism to it too. To do it also publicly and be like, I'm saved, God loves me, Jesus is in my life. I think actually these rich people, you see it quite a lot. I've seen a lot of rich people over the years convert for a time. All of a sudden they're saved and, they go 100% full speed into it. They're all pious and wearing veils and wearing rosemary beads, and it lasts about 2 or 3 years. Then it just fades out because it's not who they really are. It was still about the self. It was like an ego kick, because the lives can get pretty meaningless, having a lot of money, running around and having loads of sex and drugs. It sounds good on paper, but no, it's not that meaningful. And ultimately you feel that void, and then they have the religion. But unless you actually change your behaviors, and you genuinely, I'll believe Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand, not because they got baptized 4 weeks ago and all of a sudden are praying on TV, but because they actually look like better people. They're doing things that aren't hyper material. And yeah, they both to me are very much symbolic of hyper materialism, consumption culture. Yes, maybe there's a certain, Jordan Peterson, you could argue that there's some substance there. He's done some good work, whatever, but no, not buying it. Sorry, guys.
Can I just add to Mike a mini piece of my testimony when I was age 17? I think it was 16, 17. And you mentioned all these people get bored with money and pleasure. So I was just a 17-year-old. And every summer we'd go to Croatia for 3 months on the beach, home near the beach. And imagine for 3 months, and I got piles of cash because I was working, I was working full time, going to high school full time. And so I had a lot of spending money. And I'd be for months on the beach in Croatia, chasing girls, drinking, and being on the beach. Very enjoyable, right? And at age 17, I got bored of it. Like, I honestly, it's like, this is boring, man. I just did night after night, just chasing women, getting drunk on the beach, and this pleasure. It's not fun. I wasn't even a millionaire. It's like middle class kid, and I just cracked open the Bible one day. Like, no one told me anything. I'm bored. And there was a Bible lying around. I opened it. I don't know what happened. It just took a life of its own, and I started with Genesis and read that summer, like literally in a short period of time, from Genesis to Revelation. I read the entire Bible through, and
even Leviticus.
Everything, literally everything. That's the way I like to consume. I read everything, and then as soon as I finished, I started again. That's when I was entering my university. I read it the second time all the way through. Like, people read different parts. I'm like, no, Genesis, all the way through, been sequential. And then and when I finished again, the third time I read it all the way through. And so, anyways, that's just that's my experience.
Well, a few things. One, by their fruits you shall know them. So give them time. It's fine. I also see massive, I agree totally that what you said, Mike, like all of the above, that they absolutely, the powers that be, big operations like this, they prioritize ones that are multitasking. They really do. I've read it in their works, and I've seen it in their psyops. There's usually many tasks at hand. And if these guys, one of the things they want to do, I do think they like the money. This is a perfect, they are absolutely following the example of the mega churches, of the preachers that make so much money. All you have to do at the end of that is say, help me spread the word, join my Substack, and you've got, 8 million subscribers on YouTube that are watching commercials or giving you money. So that's big. There's money in that for sure. As far as the transition, I would be interested in going back and listening to the conversation that Jordan Peterson had with Bishop Barron a few years ago, where Jordan Peterson, they both recognized each other as based, but Jordan Peterson was still agnostic. And Bishop Barron wanted to talk to him. I never listened to it then because I didn't care, but I would be interested now to hear Jordan Peterson's arguments against why he didn't embrace God and Jesus at the time, and see if it looks like he is, we're never going to hear another interview like that, but maybe we will. Maybe the stuff that he did with Russell Brand will directly contradict his basic arguments there. I would want to go back and listen to that. And then the last thing, and this may be too, not fully formulated, but as you guys were talking about this trend of Hollywood, whatever, I remember back in the day, like if you watch the Grammys, and like Katy Perry was Russell Brand's gal for a while, like there's a lot of, Black Massy kind of stuff on that if you watch like some of the individual things. And it was really getting bad for a while. And then in 2016, people were talking about the cultural change that Trump was going to bring, that this was a revival from the right and things were going to change. And I remember thinking at the time, if you see like the Grammys abandoning that stuff, if this is going to be a real cultural paradigm shift, you're going to see a kind of spiritual change. I thought it would be genuine, but now it looks like it's just artificial. And I remember, I think it was that Grammys where Pharrell Williams came out and said, I'd like to thank the Lord. And I remember thinking, like, did he look up or down? Like, who was he talking to? But now, so I bet you could go back to 2016 and actually see that change, because I also noticed that vulgarity entered the mainstream. It no longer got censored. People would say it on news. Politicians would say it. That was in 2015 or 2016 because Trump led the way in that. So I saw a cultural change there. That would be an opposite one. But I feel like that this was part of a much bigger intentional paradigm shift in the basic culture, or just to build that up to have more conflict, because you also had wokeism rising at the same time.
Yeah, I just want to add something because it just came to me as well. Like this whole narrative in the US around civil war is something that they've been pushing for a long time. And we've all said that Donald Trump is the perfect person to ignite the right and to really get people into a state of panic and fear that will push them to fall for the bait. If the bait is get out on the streets and protest, maybe take your guns, open carry, and and then all of a sudden you have an event that spirals out of control. And if you think about it with the religious aspect, the Peterson and the brand definitely is feeding into that narrative that Trump was saved by God. Jesus came down and he punched that bullet and he knocked it out of the air. So it just deflected. And of course, we had the second event, let's call it. I think it's wild to even call it a second assassination.
Oh, the alleged, they're even calling it the alleged assassination attempt, the second one.
Because that one was even more, they couldn't even be asked with that one. It was just like, screw it. Just put a guy there and we'll call it whatever. Yeah, it was a lazy one. But I think that feeds into that too. And I also, again, if you can get people to believe that this is a spiritual war, which it is, but if you can direct that towards some, let's say some bad actors, you can again get them to really believe that they need to go out and fight and it's civil war time. Let's get out on the streets because we're fighting for God. You need big narratives. You need a lot of passion behind it. And that's not normal politics. Normal politics is bickering and it's a bit petty. But if they are really going to try and do a civil war narrative, I think that this stuff we're seeing, it feels to me like that would work. You'd get people agitated enough to buy into it.
I just want to add, I'm reading this book by Dr. Martin Erdmann, one of my favorite modern day authors. He's a German theologian. And finally, I was supposed to have him on the podcast this week, Tuesday, and I send a reminder message, and he sends me an email that he was barely able to get out to me. He had a heart attack over the weekend, heart surgery or something.
Oh my God.
I was like, what are the chances? And so I think he's a pastor in Germany, and he's not even able now. He's weak all day, he says. I think he's okay now, but I'm reading his book, and it's basically soaked in a lot of the Christian perspective, but he's looking at history and politics. He's talking about America, liberalism, the founding fathers, a lot of Freemasonry stuff, very well sourced. And that makes me think, like, from the Christian worldview, when you're talking about civil war, and I've been guests on some podcasts, and I get kind of uneasy when some of these people interviewing me, or if I'm interviewing them, they have this reaction that's the Bible would put in terms carnal. From the true biblical perspective, you're supposed to be spiritual. Where Jesus says, I'm not of this world, right? It's a spiritual mission. I always refer back to his discussion with Pontius Pilate. He's like, I can snap my fingers and bring the angels and destroy the Roman Empire and impose this new theocratic political empire. It's like, no, that's not the point. And so you see a lot of, and Martin Erdmann explains in his book that, all of this revolutionary idea, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, this civil wars, would be another iteration of that same founding revolutionary idea. That's not biblical. I don't think Christians should participate in violence. I almost feel like we're flies on the wall. We're supposed to be speaking.
Tolstoy.
Right. Yeah. We're supposed to be talking with passion, energetically saying, come to Christ, or if we see evil, pushing back, non-violently. Of course, we have the right to defend our immediate family, but we're not supposed to take up arms against the government, even if it's an unrighteous government, in my view. And so that kind of goes back to what we're saying. There's, I think, a true biblical Christians, and then you've got these people who are reacting. It's and I've been guilty of that many ways. If you're wronged by some policeman or something, you get angry and you want to react vocally, and it's just like, no, and so when this person I spoke to not long ago said, I want to take my arms and fight against the government, I'm like, yeah, no, that's exactly what they want you to do. That's exactly what they want you to do.
Yeah, like the riots and the immigrants. So I would say I'm not a total pacifist. I agree with you. The culture of death and war and everything is definitely a plot. Tolstoy said the same thing. He said this myth of Christian nations, you guys are warring, and he became then a spiritual anarchist because of that. And speaking of Russia, they had the World War, but they also had civil war at the same time. And I think that's a possibility here. And I think the way that might pull out is pan out, and it folds into the assassination thing. But getting back to how they're exploiting religion, not only do they think that's preacher, I think it's the culture, I think it's conflict. I think they're also like in Europe, the powers that be may be welcoming Islam because of its hierarchy, because of its Sharia, church and state combo, more centralization, more control. But here, it's not the Muslim religion that they're looking at. They're looking at using Catholicism. You have J.D. Vance converting to Catholicism, Candace Owen, and the Christianity as a kind of hierarchical thing, central control. It's a good model. It's a better model than our liberties. And that makes me also wonder if one possible scenario is that you actually you do get a third time's the charm kind of assassination attempt that really takes out Trump, that he gets in and it takes him out. And we have J.D. Vance, who has a much more hierarchical, authoritarian ideology, which I think he's acting it out, but that's what he would be there to usher in. And if you look at the progression, the first assassination attempt was supposedly the deep state. The second one was supposedly, I don't know if this is common, but I was reading between the lines. They were kind of saying it was an inside job because nobody would have known Trump's schedule. And the third attempt, it looks like we're being set up to think that it's Iran. So Trump gets in, they take him out, they blame Iran. Vance creates this, he's so antithetical to the, real liberty, like the U.S., the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, stuff like that, that could cause civil conflict at home, a real, true, like civil war, but at the same time, give an excuse to unleash on Iran out of vengeance. I mean, I know that sounds like a lot of speculation, but there's many dots there that make me think they really have a big paradigm shift in mind, and war at home and war abroad would usher in such a major change that you could be vulnerable then to world government and a complete shift in society.
I'll just add something that you said that I never thought of that is a plausible scenario where you had Russia during World War I, it was a civil war and World War. China during World War II had a civil war and participation in World War. And so that is a very plausible scenario where we could be off to World War and be experiencing a civil war. And it's almost like what Israel is doing is normalizing this constant assassination of political figures in other parts of the world. That kind of can, leaks over to the American world. And Vance is like the technocracy. He's backed by Peter Thiel and this new fake Christian thing that's, others have explained that much better. Michael O'Fallon of Sovereign Nations, that there's it's like this right, woke right now that's happening. You have the woke left, but now this is this woke right. And that's including like Peterson and Russell Brand, I believe. But anyways, interesting.
That's what Trump brought in. He got it. I always called it a European style right, which we didn't have. Our right was conservative, which means you conserve the past, but our past was classical liberalism. Our past was the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So our conservatives, my father, who was a traditional conservative, was really a libertarian. And when I began to meet Europeans, and they would use the words right and liberal were kind of the opposite of the way we thought of them here. And I've been saying from the beginning, Trump was bringing identity politics to the right. He was bringing European style conservatism, like the idea of being on the right to him was and they're using it right now with the floods in North Carolina. If you guys have a couple more minutes, we can talk about that, where you have these red state people saying that, where's the federal government when you need it? You're sending money to Ukraine, but you're not sending it to us. That's nationalism. That's National Socialism in a way. And that's the kind of thing that Trump has been bringing to us. So I feel like we are potentially in position for a major cultural shift like that, and it's a nerve-wracking. But what do you guys have a couple of minutes to talk about this North Carolina flood? So there was a hurricane, Helene, that by just casual observation, as well as people I trust who do follow the weather, and I know that it's absolutely 100% possible, is that that storm looks highly artificial to me. Anything that's 3 standard deviations away from the mean, and there's an alternative explanation than just chance, I'm taking the alternative explanation, which is they contributed to that. What it did was absolutely devastate, wash away this Asheville, North Carolina, which is supposed to be, I mean, some people would have argued that it was the most beautiful town in America. Like, people loved Asheville. And it was remote. People would go there for the natural beauty. And I hate it when stuff is like sent to me 3 times in one day. I'm thinking I'm meant to have this interpretation, but you cannot deny, I think it's in the mainstream and everything, that there is the only source of this extremely high-end lithium, or the biggest source, and then the only source for a particularly high-end quartz. The environmentalists, I'm not even going to say that. The people who enjoy and love nature and want to protect nature, who live there, who moved there for that reason, were objecting to some of the plans to expand this. But even unrelated to that, it doesn't even have to go that far. This is considered to be potentially one of the most valuable minerals on Earth and the most valuable deposit. In my mind, they wouldn't leave that to democracy. They would simply have to cordon that entire area off for the future of AI, if nothing else. So that's what and there's also implications for the election, because these are critical, pivotal red states. Georgia, North Carolina, razor thin margins here. If they're really keeping those people home, if they really don't have total control of the election, and this is how they do it, it would also feed into the possibility that Kamala might win. Although I think these other things make me think Trump is slated to win.
Yeah, I think that Kamala, I always put forward different theories, like what could be their agenda here, because you know that it's not going to be legitimate. Whatever happens, it's going to be planned. And I always think they put themselves in that most advantageous position where they could change their mind even on the last day. They could say, no, we're going to swing it this way. So they kind of set it up to give themselves the most flexibility. And, if you really wanted to create chaos, just make it look like Trump's going to get in and throw Kamala in at the last minute, and then drop a load of media insinuating that it was rigged, and then get Trump, maybe they go for the 3rd attempt, which you said, and it looks like he's been taken. There's so much stuff you could do with this situation, and it all goes back to the fact of 10, the heat up to 10 in the world. Like, everyone's on edge. America especially is like, it's like getting to melting point over there. Everyone's so stressed, and this hurricane, like the stuff with the lithium, like, I'm really not sure personally. I think it's totally plausible. But I don't know. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's just like anything's possible to me right now, because we've got no trust in the people who are running it. But what you said is really interesting. Did you think that you'd see the people on the right in America clamoring for more FEMA? Just a few years ago, it was like, oh, FEMA's the enemy and all these camps exist. And now it's like, bring in the FEMA. Where's FEMA? So yeah, totally weird how these narratives are shifting and shaping. It's definitely, in my opinion, not natural how they're being shaped.
COVID did that too. It took entrepreneurs who would never need any money, were responsible people, and devastated their lives so that they were forced to take rent relief, or, they were really basically forced. There was no other way to do it. And yeah, I mean, I think that they might use, if the word gets out, if people accept this idea that it was a fake hurricane and it got Kamala in, you've got legitimacy issues. And for me, every single presidential election since the year 2000 has had to have legitimacy issues so that people no longer believe in democracy, and it's very divisive.
I would just add, my working thesis, I haven't done a deep dive on the Carolina thing, but from what I've seen, there's been mentioned these mainstream articles going back a few months, even a few years, quartz, right? Lithium. And we know whether, geoengineering is a thing. Just a few days ago, Saudi Arabia, mainstream article talking about Saudi Arabia doing weather modification. And
yes, big floods followed that. There was a report, an internationally recognized report people sent to me 3 times, and a week later there were massive floods, and they were like, or Dubai.
I think they had made it. Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
Sorry,
but I mean, we're being made aware of this now. Another thing that's separating the conspiranoid from the normie.
And I think the other thing, you're seeing all these memes of the illegal aliens being brought in or getting thousands upon thousands of dollars, and then those people intentionally. I think the thing with FEMA, I agree with what you said, Mike. But the issue is that FEMA is preventing people in the private capacity to come in and help. So it's almost like they are so in your face doing it's like Bizarro World, you know, the Superman Marvel universe. You've got, I think it was Bizarro, where it's like literally you go on a planet where everything is the opposite.
Yes.
And it's like literally where, you know, it's like good is bad and bad is
inversion.
Good. It's completely inverted. And it's like literally FEMA is stopping people from being helped. And it's, what's going on there? I mean, they're so diabolical. This Mayorkas guy, I mean, this guy, just look at his face. And he's like, he'll be like, you know, torturing you. And like, I'm not torturing you. I'm giving you a massage. You know, it's just like, these are the types of people that rule the world currently. And I think part of it is they're insane. They're carrying out the goals, which is kind of as you alluded to. And the other is that they also want to get people ginned up, angry. Right?
Yes, definitely. That's definitely.
Yeah, well, you know, this is something that I've been noticing for years now, in that every time there's a natural disaster, like it happened in Canada too with the forest fires, it's not a case of like trying, like, you know, they go in and say, oh, we're trying to help people. But there's a huge amount of authoritarianism that comes with that, where they just literally say, you know, you can't go back to your house. No, you can't go here. We're blocking off the bridges. Everyone get out. No, you can't take aid in. And it's like, what are we doing here? Like, where's the humanity gone? And where's the so-called democracy gone? You know, could you imagine that America, the home of the free, apparently, would be stopping people taking aid to victims of a natural disaster? Like, that just blows my mind.
They won't let them send drones to find people who need help or bodies. Drones. I mean, they're not sending their own, so they won't let other people. And meanwhile, their drones are everywhere.
I mean, for me,
had to say, sorry, how I go?
I mean, that's the administrative state right there. I mean, what you guys are saying, like in a normal world, FEMA shouldn't even exist. But, you know, whatever bureaucracy agency that would be, whose job that would be, they'd be like, yeah, everyone go ahead, you know, go come in, go out there, send in the drones, help, you know, take your truck, help, you know, people go in their canoes, do what you can. That's the normal world. And now it's like they're trying, because I recently interviewed Ned Ryan on his a pretty good book, American Leviathan, on the managerial state. And this is what this is. It's like, no. You must defer everything. Whether it's, in this case, this hurricane situation, you defer to the state. Whether it's health, defer to the experts, you can always only listen to the experts and the government agency. Nothing else.
Right. Yeah, and the private stuff is failing.
This is a guide on how to wash your hands.
And it doesn't work. So I think we covered it all. And it looks like, although if you guys have anything else to add, but it just looks like our next scheduled conversation would be the day after the election. So you want to make any predictions? You want to, what are you waiting for? What are you worried about? What are you going to do? Are you going to go into the basement, wait for the day to pass and hope the sun rises again?
I think it's going to be, I'm not sure the election's going to happen, firstly. I'm not sure that it's going to happen, that there isn't going to be, for the first time, some disruption that actually halts it and causes everything to go into conspiracy, suspicion, and anxiety. So I'm going to put that one out there. But if it does go ahead, I think it's going to be Trump. And I think it's going to be, from that point on, a very steep downhill for the world.
I'm just going to wait until whoever is announced is announced. I'm just kind of checked out a lot in that regard. But I just reposted this old video from this late Russian politician Zhirinovsky. I mean, this is incredible. In 2019, he came out and said on a TV show, these were the last elections, referring to Ukraine. You won't have elections in 2024 because there won't be a country named Ukraine. You're not considering the situation in the Middle East. Such events will unfold there that everyone will forget what Ukraine is. This is about World War III. Iran is not Vietnam, North Korea, or Kosovo. The most terrible events will take place there. And he's made other insane, years ahead of time, precise forecasts. And that makes me think, like, he's probably some part of some Freemasonic secret society network where they know, these things are planned. And so I don't know, somehow he had the liberty to say what he said. I don't know how he died, the real true circumstances of how he passed recently, but he's literally predicted it. And so as you say, Mike, I mean, we may not have elections in the U.S. or we might get the old switcheroo and they toss Kamala in to create the civil war scenario. But as of late, as I like to say, I'm just going to go on living my life normally here on the ground in Mexico, day to day. That day or the next day, I'll go out, buy some groceries, make some coffee, turn on the computer and see what.
Hope for the best.
Yeah.
I don't like to catastrophize, as they say. So I don't think it's totally fine. And I think absolutely necessary to prepare for these kind of breakdowns. And we know Parallel Mike has dedicated his life to that. And I appreciate that. But I also feel like you also have to prepare for that not happening, which I know you both do as well. I'm terrible at predicting what these people want to do. It's like the stock market. Yeah, if analyzing the value of a company and the desire of people to buy their products would predict the stock price, I'd probably be a lot better at stock picking. But there's stuff going on behind the scenes that I can't know, and I know I don't know them. So I'm going to let that, I'm just going to wait and see, get some popcorn, but also have some dried food, a couple of guns, some locks on the basement door, and just see what happens.
Yeah. The day after, I'll take the 2,000 meter elevator trip back to the top of the surface out of my bunker. I'll have a look around and
periscope up. Hope for the best. Get a little air sample. Bring it down. All right, gentlemen.
Listeners, I think for listeners, just don't take this stuff so seriously. We talk about it, we think about it because we're living through it, but ultimately the sun will rise, the sun will set. You'll have your family. You'll have everything's, you just focus on your little life, whatever that is, and love it and enjoy it because that's all we've got is the time we've got now. Make the most of it.
And the administrative state will march on, whether it's Kamala or Donald. So
right.
At the end of the day, whatever.
Well, thank you very much. We are Cognitive Dissidents. Parallel Mike, Hrvoje, Moric, Monica Perez. Thank you so much for listening.